Fake HOA cops target fat black man's family, unaware. He is a Delta Force commander. It began like any other evening in the quiet suburbs. The sun hung low, painting the sky in amber and fire, while the hum of distant lawnmowers slowly faded into silence. Garrett Lomax stood in his driveway, wiping grease from his broad hands after tuning up his old pickup truck. The scent of motor oil and summer grass lingered in the air. For a moment, everything felt ordinary. Then he felt it. A shift in the air, that heavy stillness that always comes before trouble. A silver SUV crept down the street, too slow to be casual. Its tinted windows reflected the dying light as it rolled to a stop in front of Garrett's house. 3 men climbed out, dressed in matching black polos, tactical belts, and cheap badges that glimmered just enough to fool the untrained eye. But Garrett wasn't untrained. Years of military service had sharpened his instincts, and every detail screamed fake. Their uneven stances, their ill-fitting gear, the smug overconfidence in their eyes. The tallest man approached with a smirk. "Mr. Lomax, we need to talk about that vehicle," he said, nodding toward the pickup. Garrett's expression didn't change. Behind him, inside the house, his wife Shanice was helping their daughter Leona with homework, while his son Bryson dribbled a basketball on the curb. This was their sanctuary, the home they'd worked for, the peace they'd earned. And these men were trespassing on it. "What about it?" Garrett asked, his tone calm but firm. The man flashed his badge like a shield. "It violates community standards." Garrett looked closer at the badge and almost laughed. No county seal, no serial number, just a cheap printout laminated to look official. "Since when does the HOA decide what people can drive?" he asked. "Trucks like that don't belong in a community like this," the man said, his grin widening. The words dripped with quiet prejudice, the kind that hides behind polite smiles. Shanice stepped out onto the porch, a cup of tea in hand, her voice soft but edged with steel. "Safety from a pickup truck?" she said. The men chuckled, but Garrett's eyes never left them. He noticed the SUV's worn tires, the mud on its plates, the bulge under one man's untucked shirt. Everything about them screamed intimidation, not enforcement. When the leader finally said, "We'll be back," Garrett didn't flinch. He simply watched as they climbed into their SUV and drove away, memorizing every sound of the engine as it faded down the street. That night, the dinner table was unusually quiet. Leona's fork scraped against her plate before she finally asked, "Daddy, why did those men sound like they were in charge if they weren't real officers?" Garrett looked at her, his voice steady but gentle. "Because that's what bullies do, baby. They act powerful so people don't question them." Bryson frowned. "So they're criminals?" Garrett nodded. "Organized ones. And people like that don't just knock once." 2 days later, the silver SUV returned. This time, there were no badges, no pretense. They parked right in front of the house and swaggered toward Shanice, who was trimming the rose bushes near the porch. "We told your husband about the violations," one said with a sneer. "Nothing's changed," Shanice met his gaze without fear. "Because your authority means nothing," she replied. Garrett stepped out from the garage, his presence commanding without a single word. "You really need better props," he said, pointing at the clipboard's fake HOA seal. "That logo's from a stock image site." For the first time, their smug confidence cracked. They left quickly, but Garrett knew this wasn't over. At night, the neighborhood fell quiet again. Curtains twitched. Shadows moved behind windows. Everyone had seen, but no one spoke. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they were afraid. Fear was the silence these men thrived on, and this neighborhood had given them plenty of it. Garrett, however, had faced fear before. In deserts, jungles, and hostile cities halfway across the world. This was nothing new. He installed security cameras, motion sensors, and lights that could turn night into day. He began logging every suspicious move, every passing vehicle. When his old friend Detective Renner called, the truth only confirmed what he already suspected. "They're part of a property scam," Renner said. "A fake HOA crew. They target families, scare them into selling low." "You're not their first target," Garrett's voice hardened. "Then they picked the wrong one." The next confrontation came sooner than expected. Shanice was alone in the driveway when the men cornered her again. "Families like yours never last long here," one of them sneered. Before she could answer, Garrett's truck turned the corner. The look on his face was unreadable, but the air seemed to thicken around him. He stepped out, every movement deliberate, controlled, dangerous. "You corner my wife and call that a reminder," he said, his voice low enough to make the ground seem to hum. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my property." The men backed away, their bravado wilting under the weight of his stare. But their eyes promised one thing. They'd be back. By now, Garrett had turned his home into something else entirely, a fortress of vigilance. Every light, every lens, every detail in place. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was preparing. That night, the explorer circled again, headlights sweeping across the walls of his home. Garrett stood at the window, arms crossed. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's finish this." When they finally returned under the cover of darkness, they expected fear. What they found was light, blinding, all-seeing light. Floodlights exploded on, drones buzzed overhead, and the quiet hum of police engines filled the air. Detective Renner's team moved in before the men even realized they were surrounded. Garrett stepped out into the driveway wearing a gray Delta Force t-shirt. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at the man who had once flashed a fake badge and said, "You're military," the man muttered. Garrett's face remained still. "Was," he replied. But old habits die hard. When the handcuffs clicked, the neighborhood came alive. Curtains opened. Doors creaked. Neighbors stepped out one by one, watching as the fake enforcers were taken away. The street was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of respect. Shanice stood beside him, her hand slipping into his. "You think they'll come back?" she asked quietly. Garrett looked down the street, where his children were already back to playing under the streetlights. "No," he said softly. "They never do once the light hits them." And as the night settled around them, the Lomax house stood still and strong, a symbol of what happens when fear meets the wrong man. They came to intimidate, but they picked the wrong house.